There are probably many good candidates for the 2018 Snowflake of the Year award, but I've chosen Julia Banks because I think she's emblematic of a kind of snowflakery that has become more prevalent in 2018. I speak, of course, of female victimhood. Remember, 2017 finished with the hashtag MeToo movement in full swing, which at the time I likened to a moral panic. And what has happened since? Well, the MeToo movement arguably reached its pinnacle this year with the Kavanaugh confirmation hearings. We now know that one of Kavanaugh's accusers, Ms. Munro Layton, a left-wing activist, flat out lied about being raped by Kavanaugh. And why'd she do it? She was angry. Oh, fair enough then. Then there was Julie Swetnick, who initially claimed that during the years 1981-82 she became aware of efforts by Mark Judge, Brett Kavanaugh and others to spike the punch at house parties so as to cause girls to lose their inhibitions and their ability to say no. But then that was walked back to, I saw Kavanaugh standing near the punch handing out cups. Yeah, that's pretty heinous. And of course there was the star of the show, Christine Blasey Ford, who couldn't corroborate any of her claims. Incidentally, both Swetnick and Munro Layton have now been referred to the FBI for investigation. And of course, let's not forget the emotional haemophiliacs that blindly support the guilty by accusation standard. Now, why bring this up? Well, because it decimates the believe all women mantra, which is at the heart of the hashtag MeToo movement and the female victimhood narrative. And how about that other female empowerment movement, the Women's March? Well, after a couple of years of promoting Linda Sarsour as one of their leaders, they figured out that they may have an anti-Semitism problem. And not only that, it seems they have a racism problem, because there are too many white women in the upcoming Californian Women's March. Now, does anyone remember what they're actually marching for again?
I am a nasty woman.
Oh yeah, that's right. The irony of all this, of course, is that a movement for female empowerment has highlighted the worst aspects of female behaviour and has helped rehabilitate stereotypes of women as weak, overly emotional and irrational, and is having, at the margins, some real-world effects. Now on to Julia Banks. Those of you watching from overseas probably haven't heard of her. I haven't talked about her on this channel before, but I did write about her in the December edition of that excellent publication, The Deep Dive, available for just $2 a month. And I talked about her in my speech at this year's Liberty Fest conference in September, the video of which has not been released yet. Yeah, get your finger out, people. You know who you are. Julia Banks was the Liberal Party member for Chisholm. She still holds that seat but has resigned from the Liberal Party to become an independent and says she will not contest the next election. And why is that? Well, basically she threw a tantrum because her preferred PM, Malcolm Turnbull, was ousted in a leadership contest and because of pervasive bullying of women and gender bias in the Liberal Party. But the only problem with that narrative is that there's not even been one example cited by Banks or anyone else of bullying of women in the Liberal Party. What we do have is some vague claims that people were pressured to make a vote one way or the other. Apparently people came into other people's offices and wouldn't leave until they had a signature. If that's bullying, then the snowflakery that has infested our university campuses has made its way to Canberra. I mean, how do people think a leadership contest goes down? Someone comes around to your office with tea and scones and asks, would you like to join Mr. Dutton's team or Mr. Morrison's team? Or how about Ms. Bishop? This isn't a ballot for class captain of the 6th grade, it's the top job in the country. If you don't like people pressuring you to vote or that won't leave your office when asked, the correct response is to tell them to piss off, not to go whinging to the media. And of course, so used to buying into the female as perpetual victims narrative, no one stopped to ask, are women being singled out for this treatment, or are men being subjected to this kind of treatment as well? And if so, why aren't they complaining about it? Julie Bishop also jumped on the poor victimised women of the Liberal Party narrative. Remarkably, in a 20-year political career, 11 served as deputy leader, she's never once complained about bullying or sexism. But now after the leadership ballot in which Bishop learns she's about as popular with her own colleagues as Mark Latham at a Labor Party national conference, she's now bravely calling out this terrible bullying, sexist behaviour. Could it be that the women complaining are either Turnbull loyalists or in seats that they almost definitely are likely to lose at the next election? Well, of course you don't need to ask those questions. A woman has asserted a truth. You need to listen and believe. But despite any substantive proof of bullying of women in the Liberal Party, the female victimhood narrative has steamrolled into a discussion about the lack of women in the Liberal Party. The Liberal Party has a woman problem. And I agree, it does have a woman problem. The Liberal Party has a disproportionate number of whiny women like Banks. And how does the Liberal Party fix this problem? By the use of quotas, of course. Julia Banks stated that quotas are not demeaning to women, and nor will women be regarded as the quota girl, which is interesting given revelations on Rita Panahi's Friday show that Labor Party women that gain office via quotas are known privately as quota queens. And now, via a December 27th puff piece in the Australian Women's Weekly, we discover where Banks gets her penchant for quotas in this tell-all interview. When she joined pharmaceutical company GlaxoSmithKline, Julia worked for a female CEO who was brought out to Australia from Europe, and her key objective, or KPI, was to balance the gender imbalance in the organisation. Julia says she saw quotas in action, and suddenly there were more women in her workplace in senior positions. When later she entered politics, she knew that fighting for gender equality would be one of her driving ambitions. Notice the sleight of hand here. Gender equality for people like Banks means preferential treatment. It's the classic contradiction of social justice as stated by Hayek. The idea of social justice is that the state should treat different people unequally in order to make them equal. And it's not really a sleight of hand anymore. The gender equality activists are now quite forthright about arguing for equality of outcome. Also in this article, Banks provides more colour around the so-called bullying tactics during the leadership battle. We got the direction to move our votes from Julie Bishop to Scott Morrison. The argument was that votes for Julie Bishop would split the opposition and Peter Dutton would win. I said no, I'm voting for Julie in the first round. And then I had people sent to me and phone calls trying to move my vote. The intimidation for Julia and others in the party was relentless. The thing that happens with bullying is people were afraid. They started becoming really concerned that Peter Dutton was seriously going to win. Men and women were being harassed and bullied. Notice now it's men and women that were being bullied. That's not the narrative we got at the time. But again, this is the great evidence of bullying. People got heated in a battle for the top job in the country. Really? What did you expect? And on top of all that, can you imagine having to put up with an eye roll? Julia, 56, headed to Canberra, a parliamentary novice with a lot to learn, filled with passion and excitement. But she quickly realised being heard was going to be an uphill battle, especially in a party with a slender one-seat majority. The party room was not what I expected. I spoke up many times, and particularly on programs about women, I'd get the eye roll from the right-wing reactionary group. So when those reactionaries seized control, Julia knew she couldn't stay. She was in Parliament to represent the people, not toe the party line, especially when that line had shifted significantly to the right. I'm not surprised you get the eye roll when speaking about programs for women. What exactly were those programs? Advocating for more equality of outcome via gender-based discrimination? How many more programs could we possibly have for women? You have your own Minister for Women, for Christ's sake. I think Banks, like Turnbull, was in the wrong party. I'd always been very open about my moderate views. My views are very socially progressive. Now, calling yourself progressive is similar to claiming you're in favour of diversity. Amongst the like-minded, you're relieved of the need to explain exactly what that means and how you plan to achieve it. Just mouthing the words makes you a good person. But of course, the problem with parts of the so-called progressive agenda is that they are actually regressive, especially when it invokes identity politics. But to point that out apparently makes you part of the reactionary right wing. And the bullying didn't stop there. There was, apparently, backgrounding that I was an emotional wreck. Backgrounding is when a politician talks to the media off the record with helpful background material that they won't be directly quoted on. Julia says people aligned with Liberal power broker Michael Kroger started a vicious campaign against her. Craig Kelly said she needs to roll with the punches. Helen Kroger said, perhaps politics isn't for her. So it was all like, she's a weakie. Yeah, that's right. They're calling you out for being a snowflake. One person she didn't mention that criticised her was Senator Amanda Stoker, who, speaking at the same Liberty Fest conference as myself, argued that women were sometimes infantilised in the parliamentary process. We've had over the last couple of weeks this discussion about whether women are being bullied in the parliament. I find it paternalistic, pathetic, that women whose job is to be able to represent people in the community, and oftentimes people who are doing it tough, then turn around and say they can't speak up for themselves in a private conversation. The idea there needs to be different treatment for women is just the strangest thing, and the fact it's rising makes it all the more bizarre. And Banks also revealed her feminist credentials. Most of the men in the Liberal Party, their wives don't work. They're at home with the kids. Now, I don't have an issue with stay-at-home mums, but I do in the sense that I believe all women should be, if not at some period in their life, they should ensure their financial independence and not to be dependent on anyone. So in other words, she does have a problem with stay-at-home mums or people that make different life choices to her. Banks is just another social engineer who wants to tell other people how they should live their lives and advocate for preferential treatment for women to achieve her utopian vision. The Liberal Party doesn't have a woman problem. The problem is women like Banks. And that's why Banks is the deserving winner of the 2018 Snowflake of the Year. I'll see you next year.